Kia ora tātou, ko Russell Hutchinson tāku ingoa, ke Quality Product Research Limited, aku tupuna ahau I mahi ana, no England, Scotland, aku tupuna, tēnā koutou katoa. My kids say that I've got terrible te reo, so thank you for putting up with that. I'm Russell Hutchinson. I'm part of Quality Product Research Limited, and it's a pleasure to have you come along, and thank you for joining us for today's session. In a moment, we are going to open up with some questions. It's a privilege to have Samantha Barrass, Chief Executive of the Financial Markets Authority, here with us, and also Michael Hewes, of course, Director Deposit Taking Insurance Advice Financial. And although probably neither of them needed an introduction to you, you'll know them very well because they represent your principal regulator in most cases. Nicola Willis said in her talk that she felt that competition in the banking sector was more like a cosy pillow fight than the type of fierce competition that she would like to see that would benefit consumers. I feel that for those of you that run professional advice firms in the room, that definitely does not apply. And I maybe just have to say, if you can set aside your fierce competitive instincts for the next hour, that would probably be much appreciated. So also a reminder, you can use your phone to send us questions, and this is meant to be an interactive session. And so if you would like to enter Gallery 4 into the app, then your question will appear here. But do make sure it's Gallery 4, otherwise it's going to confuse the other breakout sessions as to what you're doing. So once again, thank you, and you can put questions through. We'll have plenty of time for that, but I'm going to kick things off by asking Samantha a couple of questions first of all. And maybe just to get us underway, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about your view of the importance of advisors to the economy.
Sure. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. Well, look. Thank you for that. But before I start, I'd like to thank you for taking your lunch break to come and spend some time with us. I feel like I have a number of conversations around the regulator and the FMA being scary, and that was why no one was sitting next to me when I was having lunch. But I'd like to, I think for me these types of engagements are incredibly important because I don't want to be scary. I think it's really important that we're able to engage and discuss things. As I kind of said in my speech earlier, the kind of approach that we are wanting to develop in New Zealand is one where we're working collaboratively. And the thing that leads to the scariness is the concern about enforcement. But we are, in my view, evidently not an enforcement-led regulator at all. And it's around working together to build prosperity for all New Zealanders. And financial advice is an absolutely core component of that, particularly when there are difficult economic times. I know. Actually, I was speaking to one of my sons in the UK, and he was kind of wanting. He was talking to me, and he said, "Oh, Mum, you know all about financial services. I'm wanting to do this with my savings, but I'm wanting to put some money away to buy a home." But I also want to go travelling next year, and then there's that, there's the stuff that Nana left, that Nana's given me, and what should I do with that? And I actually said to him, "Sweetheart, what you really need to do is go and speak to a financial advisor. I am not the best person for you to talk to." And so I gave him the name of my financial advisor, and I said, give Gary a call, and he will help you. And that really, that was a personal conversation that I was having, and I went straight to the professional value that financial advisors bring when we're asking really quite basic questions. It's all of us. I've got, I constantly email. I'm emailing Gary at the moment about what do you think the UK government's going to do in the budget announcements in October, and what do you think I should do with my pension savings? And he's emailing me back saying, I don't know. He said, I'm not going to advise you on the New Zealand tax regime, but here's how. So for me, I'm speaking not as a regulator here. I'm talking about the central role that advice plays in helping me support me and my family deliver our goals and aspirations. And I want to start with that because it's not just about regulation, it's not just about the Code for Professional Advisors, it's actually about how absolutely essential it is, and it's to advice. And it's also the value of the independent. So don't forget, I told my son that I wasn't the best person to speak to him about what he did. Actually, he needed to go to someone who was independent to provide him with some advice. So it is absolutely critical, and I really sort of want to value that, and I think it's particularly important. The value of advice is particularly important in the current environment, because it's not just around, what should I do with my investments? It's about actually advice on how you balance, how as a household or an individual, you balance competing things in difficult circumstances. So, those choices over what do you spend now and what do you invest for the future. Actually, what type of insurance do I need to support my family and me? Am I insured enough? What are the kind of products that I need to be investing in? How should I balance saving? And one of the points is how do I balance investing and borrowing? Those are some things, and they're very unique to each individual household. And the value of independent advice to support households making those decisions, in my view, is absolutely front and centre of a well-working financial regime. So I burbled on a bit, but this is a passion for me, as I'm not just as a regulator. So
no, that's fantastic, and a great introduction. If we can move on to the question of fair outcomes, and then ask a little bit about what you expect the advisor's role is in terms of your consultation on fair outcomes, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. So I'm not going to repeat what I said in my speech earlier today, and one of the reasons I'm not going to do that is because the financial advice community is already one step ahead on this. And why do I say that? It's because when you look at the code for financial advisors, unlike the incredibly detailed prescriptive financial advice regimes that I have been used to in the UK and Europe, which go thousands of pages, very detailed, 8-point font, actually what you've got in the code is incredibly outcomes-led. And when I was doing my homework before I took my role on, it was one of the things I looked at was the code for financial advice, and I thought, wow, this is a jurisdiction that really knows what good regulation looks like. And because that's front and centre of the regime for financial advisors, frankly, even if you look at something like Standard 1 treating clients fairly, you're all very familiar with that. So you're already there. If you're looking at the code and you're thinking about how does it apply in the business that I'm doing, then you're already working in a very outcomes-focused way.
Nice, thank you. We know that economic conditions can make it tough for particularly some types of advisors at the moment, dealing with lots of clients that might be experiencing some hardship, perhaps more for the mortgage advisors in the room. But how does the FMA make sure that it executes its mandate in a manner which is proportional to what it's going to find in each advice business? Yeah.
Well, the central point is it is not a one-size-fits-all, both in terms of the regulatory regime we've got and the way in which we take it forward. So the approach that we would take to a bank is going to be really different to a small firm of advisors. We've got a range of tools and guidance that we can provide that you can see with Michael will pick this up. I think you can see with the financial advice monitoring report, which we published earlier this year. We are we're very much into supporting the fact that your businesses best, and therefore the start, where you think how you think the regime needs to be applied to fit your business is going to be a great place to start.
Fantastic. I know that we'd like to sort of get an opportunity to take the pulse of the room, so maybe now is a good time for us to do that. What would you like us to do?
I'm going to look at Michael here a bit, but I think I kind of want to know, I think both of us are quite keen what's front of mind, if we could kind of...
Sort of maybe a 1 or 2 words around from
Yeah.
everybody who's in the room. Yeah. See,
Yeah, I mean, certainly the last FAP forum that we ran in January as a regulator, we found it really informative as we actually went around the table, and it was an opportunity for people to share what's forefront of their mind, because as, certainly as Samantha said, we are an engagement-led regulator. That is why we are here today. That is why we'll be here tomorrow as well. So, yeah, really keen to hear what's forefront of your mind. What are we doing well? Where are the pain points? What have you seen recently that you've really liked from the FMA as well? So really important to go through and talk about that. And then maybe I can talk about the report afterwards, Russell.
Yep, that'd be fantastic. Oh, yeah.
You can share. You can share. We won't...
Very good. Okay, Nicola, can I come to you first? Oh, I know, you're our first victim. Yeah. Just 1 or 2 words. What's top of mind in terms of your regulatory?
Just said I'm not an advisor. All I know, and that's front of mind at the moment, and I've had probably 3 phone calls this week, are advisors wanting to leave the FAPs they're in and trying to get their own FAP and wanting help to quickly get out of the FAP they're in because they can't stand it and it's holding them back.
Nice.
But then they've also got issues because they can't get agency applications until they've been in industry for 2 years.
Right. I'm going to interpret that as regulatory flexibility around licence form. If that's all right, we'll we'll hand on to an advisor. The rest of your table are FMA. So.
One thing's a frustration is getting people through their level 5. The time it takes to market. I'm all for it, 100% supportive of it, but we're finding that the institutions are taking their time to mark. They've got their time frame. We've got people that have already completed all the exams and assignments they need to.
Nice.
They've got to wait to the cycle. And so they won't get their certificate for another month.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'll interpret that as time to get somebody qualified. Let's keep going. Who else? Peter, at the back.
I can probably talk anyway. You can hear me, can you?
Oh, let's get your mic because we're recording the session. So, yeah.
My concern is whether the consumer is getting a balanced approach. I think they see the good work that FMA is doing around enforcement, but one of the things is making advice accessible and having confidence in advice and trust in advice, and whether the FMA is feeling that they're getting the right balance on getting that trust and confidence in the consumer marketplace.
Nice, thank you. Who's next? Are you keen, David? Is that a raised hand? No. Okay. Tony.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. What's top of my mind is we all have the same focus on consumer outcome, and there's a lot of good conduct and across various different market service licences. And I'd like to see the FMA assist the community as a whole work together. So that's between COFI, FAP licences and sharing obligations, so that we don't have creep across businesses when we're trying to achieve the same thing.
Nice. Yeah. David, yeah. Go on, good. Yeah.
Yeah, I chaired the professional advice workshop yesterday in this very same room. One of the themes that came through from the panel was the strive for complexity or for simplicity, in documentation for consumer consumption. They found that they were running into difficulties with legal department's interpretations of obligations from the regulator to simplify things and to put it into plain English in easy terms.
Yeah, I struggle with the constant directions from compliance to make sure that these things are at the front of the document, but there's only one page at the front of the document, it's just, indeed. Who else is keen? At the back there, sorry, lady with the glasses.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth from Fisher Funds, and as a product manufacturer, we also employ advisors. And on a positive note, I'd like to say that although we weren't included in the monitoring for classes 1 and 2 FAPs, we do appreciate that type of information coming back to the industry, where we can leverage the findings from monitoring visits amongst participants in the industry and take best practice learnings. Probably really looking for more reporting on best practices, or what we could aim for as entities within the advice space.
Nice, thank you. Any others? Well, thank you for that, and do keep putting your questions through. I know I've got a couple of questions already have come through, but I'll turn it over to you, Michael. You wanna...
Wonderful, and thank you very much for that. Maybe it's a nice place to actually start with that, very much that last question that came from Elizabeth. As you know, several months ago, the FMA released its first monitoring report under the new regime, 12 months in, and the approach to this was very different to anything the FMA had done previously, certainly in the 8 to 9 years that I've worked with the FMA. Traditionally, when we've done monitoring review reports and released them to the market, we've been very quick to go through and share where the deficiencies or where the gaps are, and it just tended to leave the report as that. It may well have been released via press release. As an outcomes-focused regulator, we've really had to go through and change how we operate and our mindset quite specifically. So for the report itself, it's how we actually approach the publication of the report, all the way through to actually how we engaged with advisors. So from an engagement perspective, firstly, it wasn't just simply about releasing a report. It was actually about the engagement as well. So our teams at the FMA went across the Motu. We went through and talked to over 500 advisors in person. And this is absolutely critical for us. It's not just about releasing a report. It's about having that engagement. It's about having that conversation. And it's about being able to go through and share those more detailed insights. And I think, you know, as people recognise, this is a new piece of legislation. It was and it is designed to provide access to advice, good access to advice, and certainly as a regulator, that's what we are encouraging. We recognise that we need to partnership, and partnership modelling is really, really important for our advisors. The report itself, yes, it went through and highlighted where we saw some gaps, where we saw some deficiencies, but critically, and this is quite a big leap ahead for the FMA, we actually went through and highlighted where we saw some really good practice as well. And we wanted to be able to go through and highlight that practice. We wanted to be able to go through and actually bring it to life. So it was actually wonderful. The feedback that I received from my teams who did the roadshow presentations themselves said there was a lot of korero, there was a lot of engagement. A 2-hour session on the report turned into a 3-hour session on the report because advisors are actually connecting with each other, right? So certainly on our work plan as we look ahead, this is more of what we actually want to go through and actually achieve. Thanks, Russ.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. And, you know, maybe I've got a couple of wondering where we go to here, but I'll carry on around the advice monitoring report first of all. And sort of, obviously you've had a lot of experience from a range of monitoring visits. We're now a good year, 18 months into the regime. And, you know, does this signal that there's perhaps going to be a change of approach in terms of how you've been looking at how that's been going?
Look, I think, you know, as you see our monitoring start to develop ourselves, we're looking for that growth and maturity of the marketplace. Certainly in the first 12 months, we have always said that we will undertake a very collaborative and collegiate approach to what we actually go through and do. This is educative. I know, Samantha, you talked this morning a lot about the guidance that we issue. So again, we will make sure that guidance actually is put into the marketplace. There is a dedicated page on our website where we release information about financial advice providers. And again, if there is something that you would like us to see or like to see or us to produce, please let us know. You know, it's really, really important. So guidance is a key part of how we go through and interact in the marketplace. Looking forward, our expectation is there's going to be that growth and development of maturity. We've often talked about the role of compliance, and compliance, it should not be a tick box exercise. Tick the boxes, move on. We've always said, you know how your business is run, you know who your clients are, develop a program that goes through and supports your business and one that delivers those good customer outcomes. Absolutely critical. So for us, as we go through and develop our monitoring approach into the next few months, we'll go back out to the marketplace and we'll be probably asking those questions again. You know, now that the regime has been embedded certainly for 18 months, what enhancements, what step changes are you actually making? Because certainly we do believe there is growth and room for improvement across some really basic things. We've talked about record keeping, we've talked about disputes resolution, we've talked about disclosure as well. So if you haven't already, please look at the report. We're very much market engagement driven, so a lot of our correspondence and our communications with some of the larger entities or the manufacturers has been, look at the report and see what you can do as well to go through and continue the development and growth of the advisory firm. Really, really important, because they're representing you, they're representing your brand as well. So this is something that, you know, if we're all on the walker together, we're paddling that walker in unison, and we're heading towards the right outcomes for clients. So absolutely critical, Russell.
Nice. And maybe following on from that, one of the questions from the floor is just, obviously, and maybe continuing on from Tony's point, was about the issue around Kofi. Kofi arrives in March, obviously, and you know there's already some concern amongst financial advice providers that there could be, in effect, some duplication of requirements, and different providers are taking different approaches to how that regime is going to be implemented and how FAPs are going to be evidencing that they are, you know, meeting certain standards to providers. So do you see it changing that provider and advisor dynamic at all?
Yeah, look, 12 or so months ago, as we started our development of Kofi, we led a series of workshops, and I recollect them as if they were yesterday. There were about 8 of them across various sectors. We knew that there would be a convergence with Kofi and with the soon-to-be implemented financial services changes with FSLA. So the workshops were held across sector. Our aim was to develop a piece of guidance in unison with the industry, right? It wasn't going to be solely industry-led or solely FMA-led. This was going to be a partnership piece of guidance, and I think extremely unique. And so actually so unique. We've had some very good discussions with regulators across the world about what we did, how we did it, our process. So the intermediated guidance was released, and I would certainly encourage not only intermediaries but also entities to actually go through and read that guidance. Our expectation is there should not be an overreach from entities into a financial advice provider, right? We quite clearly stipulated attestations and maybe not necessarily the right way to go. Yeah, of course, while we go through and expect there to be some form of oversight, it's that partnership oversight, right? And it's that partnership with your intermediaries and making sure that, yes, they're representing you and representing your brand, but again, it's an opportunity to work in real partnership. Yeah. Sam, yeah.
Oh, is this working?
Yeah.
I can put mic and do deep breaths and speak loudly if it's not. I think this is a real watch on area for me, and for all of us at the FMA. My experience of these types of circumstances where you've got something like a financial advice regime marrying up with a institution's conduct regime is that there is almost like a continuous risk of regulatory overlap. I think we're going to have to keep quite an eye on it. And it does also relate to the point that was raised on the kind of striving for simplicity and what goes on when you've got, and I don't want to, because I'm aware we've probably got some compliance people in the room and they do an amazing job, but it also relates into the point that I made in my speech, which is we need to manage the risk of going round into ever-decreasing circles of highly risk-averse, and by risk-averse, it's kind of regulatory risk-averse. We don't want to do anything that could lead the regulators to come knocking at our door with, jackboots and dragging us out and putting us up against the wall and shooting us.
I have a question about jackboots.
Yeah. So, we've just got to keep. So I'm understanding. I understand what's going on here, but you've got a number of things that can, if we don't keep a grip on it, can just kind of really cut across the delivery of the outcome. So, one of the points that was raised over the simplicity and documentation is actually really related to this point. So bear with me, which is, what stuff do we have to shove into the front page of, which has to, of course, be like an A1 sheet because there's so much stuff that needs to go on the front page. But actually, can consumers even understand what's on it by the time we've got all the stuff or all the stuff that's on it in kind of like 5-point in footnotes at the bottom? So does that actually cut across what consumers need to understand? And is that creating a freezing effect? As far as kind of great regulatory outcomes is concerned, there is no one silver bullet that's going to fix this. So we began the work a year ago when we recognised this risk, where you've got the crashing together of people who are doing a great job to manage risk, legal and compliance risks to their organisations, and the way in which services, the way in which the relationship between advisors and providers and product creators works. Ultimately, it needs to be those who are running the firm, those who are running the company. They need to go in at a strategic level and take a view of how do we balance up the various regulatory requirements. But that doesn't happen. That it's like Russ never sleeps. It's something that we need to keep an eye on. And so what I would ask you to do is to really using the engagement that we have. So when Michael and they're constantly engaging with the financial advisor, but you use the engagement vehicles you have to give us a heads up to where you see it happening. So that we can begin together to sort of make sure that risk doesn't come through. So I just really wanted to make those points.
And I appreciate that striking that balance is really difficult, and I can feel it right now, because on the one hand, we've had comments about, being scared to have a simpler document. And in another session, I've heard one of our panelists talking about advisors being scared to recommend a cheaper, more affordable product because of more limited coverage, for example. But on the other hand, I've got a questioner here who says, you've been very tolerant so far. When is the big stick going to come out? I sense that they're keen on that. Where does the balance lie? Are you going to move towards? I know you said you're not an enforcement-led organisation. You've stressed engagement a lot, but is there more big stick to come?
Look, I think if you look at the summary of the report itself, the FMA was really encouraged by what it saw, and I think to Samantha's original point, a code has been in existence in one way, shape for many, many years, and financial advisors are actually ahead of the curve, right? You're building businesses where you have personal relationships with people that live down the street. These are intergenerational relationships, right? when we talk about big stick, yes, if it is recidivist offenders, right, where we've gone through and we at lengths post a monitoring a visit, and I'll deviate slightly, and I actually talk about a monitoring visit, we don't, contrary to popular belief, we don't knock on the door and say we're here. We actually ring beforehand, we make a suitable time, we work around school holidays, availability of the teams, we send out quite a clear scope and who we'd like to go through and talk to. So again, it is very collaborative, because the last thing we want to do is catch people out, right? That's not who we actually are. So any on-site is done. It might be, it varies again, depending on the size of the business. It might be an online or aratahi visit, which is, an impactful, quick visit, all the way through to a 2 to 3 day visit. But again, it's proportionate. It's the size of the business, right? Post the monitoring visit, we always have a debrief before we physically leave the offices. We issue a feedback letter, and again, that feedback letter, there should be no surprises in that feedback letter, and it's an opportunity again for the business or the FAP to look at and remediate. We work through proper time frames, and I encourage my team to make sure that if time frames can't be achieved, we understand why, right? Yeah, so I'm trying to remove a lot of that fear, certainly out of our engagements with entities. So certainly, big stick. Look, if we work through a process or we see quite egregious customer harm, yes, we will move very, very quickly. But on the whole, what we have seen with financial advice as a sector is something to be really, really proud of.
Yep. And clearly, big stick's possible. You mentioned in your session in the main plenary, the toughest sanction yet used by the FMA since its inception. So it's possible at that extreme end. But maybe shifting gear, not just talking about enforcement around financial advisors. One of the questions from the floor is, how does the FMA perceive the risk of financial influencers? I know you have a publication quite a while back on this. Not technically giving personal advice, but with increasingly large followings around money, investing, wealth, and tips, and so forth. And if you could perhaps take us through some of that, that would be great.
Maybe I can start off there.
Okay.
It's what we refer to as our perimeter market, right? Those that aren't necessarily licensed by us. 2-3 years ago, the FMA, I think, took a lead amongst a lot of regulators worldwide, and I know I had a lot of contact from the FCA and also ASIC. We actually produced a guide for finfluencers, helping them understand what they could and could not say. Who would have ever thought Kim Kardashian was a financial advisor or providing advice? But I think she and a lot of even NFL players, were involved with all sorts of crypto advice and the what have you. Look, we recognise and understand the growth in influencing digitisation of advice and access. The growth of the TikTok models. I'm probably going to show my age and say Facebook, because that's probably in decline. But certainly digitisation of advice. We monitor this extremely carefully. We have a dedicated team. We have some very intelligent tools that we utilise that scrape the web. We look across a whole broad range of social medias. I guess probably one of the observations, and I know Sam will speak to this, quite often the influencers themselves are targeting those that are extremely vulnerable in our community, those that might be looking for very high rates of return or have promises made that we just know from an educative perspective just can never be realised. So, Russell, we actively look at the influencers. We'll often make direct warnings to them. If you haven't yet subscribed to our webpage, please do. We have a great scams alerts system. We've got our head of licensing here today, Anita Fraser, who many of you will actually know, and it's her and her team that go through and monitor this so carefully. So where we see it, where we believe it is at detriment of consumers, or where it is wrong, it sits outside of our licensing scope, we'll post a warning on it. Sam.
I mean, that's covered. I mean, it's a combination of the resources that we put in to our perimeter work, which is keeping a real focus on how do investors get their information, what influences them, and we're likely to, over time, supplement what we're doing by way of monitoring on the perimeter to also doing more research over time on where is it that, what is it around behaviour, what is it that is influencing the way that consumers and investors behave. So the kind of behavioural research will be something that we will do more on. So that's kind of, where is it dangerous? The other group, the work that we did 3 years ago to actually target those who target influencers, bring them in, have a talk to them. Sometimes people, some celebrities and things can occasionally just fall unwittingly into financial advice, and they don't quite realise what they're doing. So the educative piece is important as well. So it's just, it's ever constant. It's analogous to the kind of, the older issue. This is even before Facebook, Michael, because I'm older than you. Where I remember early on in my regulatory career, we had to kind of engage with journalists who would have their personal finance columns. Again, very similar. Very similar dialogue over where does kind of broad range musings step dangerously into the provision of inappropriate tips and advice, and so that's been a constant issue. I think you've covered the ground beautifully, Michael. Yeah.
And I saw that influencers report, and I felt that there was a part of it which was two columns, sort of you can say this, you cannot say that, that particular piece, and very, very valuable. I commend it to any financial advisor to have a look, because of course most of the things that are in the you cannot say, you could equally change the heading and say, if you are licensed, you can, but only if you are licensed, and so it's a good one to pick up.
And I think post the release of that guidance, I think we saw a couple of influencers. Right, okay, I'm going to go through and undertake my level 5 quals, and actually became licensed, which was wonderful.
Because licensing is not meant to be an obstacle to expressing those views; it's only meant to regulate them.
Exactly, and there is actually a potentially strong, good, positive outcome from this, which is that if you think about one of the points that came out, which is access to advice, influencers are finfluencers and make money out of being finfluencers because they've got big audience reach. So if actually they can know what they can say and they are encouraged to actually take their level 5, that has an impact on broadening access to advice potentially. So it's the usual thing actually. Is that one of the challenges with regulation is it's not about necessarily shutting things down if we see things that are dangerous. Sometimes it's about actually how can we bring and move and make the most of the opportunity at the same time as managing the risk.
Well, that's a good opportunity for us to go to another one of our floor questions, which is obviously digital is about trying to create better access to advice. And there's quite a few people here who are interested in expanding digital advice within their practices. We all think it's going to become much more commonplace. Will there be a different version of monitoring? How will that look for a digital advice service?
Yeah, look, it's certainly a good question. If people remember back to the previous regime, the financial advice regime, and if you wanted to offer non-human was actually the term, then there was actually a separate application that needed to be made. The FMA went through and assessed that, and then it was tabled and actually in Parliament, because then it became certainly listed in one of the statutes. So not very friendly at all. With FSLA, of course, we've removed that requirement altogether, and it's certainly interesting as we went through the licensing process, and it was one of the questions, whether you'd be providing some form of digitised service, yes or no, just to help us. And there were a lot of advisors that went through and ticked yes. So from a regulatory perspective, we removed those barriers. And I think as we went through FSLA consultation, we heard that loud and clear. So absolutely no requirement whatsoever for an additional licence. What we do encourage is if you are considering providing a digitised service, come and talk to us. So many firms, so many entities have come and shared with us what they are actually working on. We're able to go through and not provide the technical insight. We certainly have a really, really wide reach across a lot of regulators worldwide to look at, where there have been potentially, regulatory impacts, or we're able to make some sort of forms of kind of connections. But certainly encourage, if you are looking to do something from a digital space, please come and talk to us. From a monitoring perspective, nothing changes at all. I think what we have a look at is, you've got the code that still obviously sits there. Where we do probably focus a wee bit more on, if there's something potentially to go wrong, you think of an algorithm that might throw something out, then it's that scale, right? And it's that potential scale of harm. But certainly really encourage digitisation for those people that are short on time, those people that are maybe younger age. I think it's a great opportunity to go through and get more people engaged with financial services.
Nice. I've got a couple of tougher questions now, I'm afraid. So one is that other regulators of professions release information about decisions on disciplinary processes. And I'm not quite sure if this is correct, so I'm going to ask this, which is that, when did you last send an advisor to the disciplinary committee? And could we expect to see regular releases of information about that?
Yeah. Okay. Look, a very, very good question. As you know, the Financial Advisory Disciplinary Committee was established again under the old regime, the financial advisors regime. Important to note that the tools and the toolbox, available to the FMA under the previous regime was a lot tighter or more constricted than it is today, right? So we actually go through and have a lot more tools we can go through and utilise before making a referral through to the FADC. Look, we follow a process from a monitoring process. If there's something that we see that causes us concern, we escalate it through to a specialised team. They do another thorough independent review. If there is opportunity or chance that may be escalated upwards, that will, of course, move up to potentially an evidence and investigations team to have a look at. What we're finding at the moment is that where we are with things that may well have previously been referred to the FADC, we're making those decisions in-house. They're a lot more efficient, they're a lot more effective, certainly a lot more efficient when dealing with any form of complaint. Also, the forefront of our mind is how it impacts clients as well. So you may well see a few decisions come out very, very shortly about advisors. But certainly FADC is still there. I meet with the chair of the FADC every quarter. We have a look at cases, and we have a look at cases that may well be suitable for FADC. So still a really, really important part of our broader ecosystem.
And we're probably in about our last 10 minutes. I want to make sure, if you're not using the app, if you want to ask a question, you can. So I thought I'd better just check in and see if anybody would like to. Chris. Oh. Suddenly we've got heaps more questions now. Okay.
Sorry, I was just charging my phone.
You can use the app, yeah.
Just some of the unintended consequences of some of the different legislations of CCCFA, where I'm in the risk advice space, where we've had perhaps a lending institution or a mortgage broker encouraging a client to cancel their life income replacement insurances, risk insurances, to meet the lending criteria.
Wow.
And that's left the client seriously exposed.
Sounds like advice around disposing of product.
Yeah, and in one particular case, that client would never get their insurances back. They were told, you get your insurance back later, but I know because of the pre-existing conditions that were covered, that client would never get it back.
So can I just understand it before my jaw gets picked up off the floor? So You're talking about a situation where someone was advised to stop paying for insurance so that they could meet lending criteria.
Yes.
Yeah, that's just if that unless I'm just taking it that was actually valuable insurance for that person.
Yes,
so
it
not,
was.
for example, some of the TV protection insurances that people still try to flog to me. Which will stop happening once we've implemented Kofi. That's just terrible. That is a really poor outcome, and it makes me really angry. So one of the, I can absolutely assure you and anyone in this room that our oversight of credit will be to, because actually, and it could probably be an example of where someone has inappropriately used the regulation, so hasn't actually been doing their job properly. That's something we see a lot. I talked about it today over liquidity risk guidance. We do see regulation being used inappropriately to be an excuse to either be lazy or to do something that kind of creates some form of profit. But what you have just described is completely unacceptable. You heard it here.
Excuse me. Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Nice. Thanks, Chris. We have a question regarding monitoring visits for Class 3 FAPs. So when do you envisage starting this process, and will these be different in any way to Class 1 and 2?
Wonderful. Thank you, Russell. Yes, we are undertaking Class 3 FAP monitoring at the moment, and that has always been on our plan. As you reflect, the Class 3 FAPs were traditionally those that were QFEs in the previous regime, financial advice regime. Certainly, we had many years of QFE returns. We know them in a lot more detail, so it was only natural then that we start to have a look at those larger FAPs. Now, interesting, and this is quite an important move for us as a regulator. We're taking a more broader, more holistic view, so we're really looking at a true entity-based monitoring regime here. So if I have a look at some of the major banks as an example, they may well have multiple licenses. They might have a derivatives license, and they may well have a MIS license. Yeah, they may have other conditions attached. So when we are now monitoring those larger entities, we're taking that broader, more holistic view, which I think is the right view because it's efficient. And it certainly goes through and lessens a lot of that regulatory impact. The last thing a large or Class 3 FAP needs to see is multiple visits by the FMA on separate days. So we're making sure that it's far more joint. To answer that question, yes, the Class 3 monitoring has started. We expect to go through and again make a release from a report perspective in the next 12 or so months once we've gone through and gathered that data as well. And look, and also just acknowledging, Russell, that we have our regulatory returns and our completion by end of September. So again, a very, very worthwhile data set, and it's important. And I know Samantha's talked about this previously, making sure that if we are bringing information in or requesting it from the industry, we need to be able to go through and replay it as well. So again, look forward to some really good insights post the regulatory returns. Thanks.
Fantastic.
And actually, just a couple of points because how are we doing for time?
We've got about another 7 minutes.
Yeah. So just a couple. One of the investments that we have made is in something that sounds very crusty, called our data and intelligence team. It's a group of data engineers and econometricians. But one of the things that we are developing in the use of regulatory returns as well is how we analyse the data in order to be able to identify broader indicators that help us to understand where risk is and where risk isn't, or what are the kinds of conversations that we want to have. So that means we're kind of making really good use. Because I always think if you're going to the trouble of putting together the returns and to get information in to us, you want to know that we're using that information. It's not just going into someone's filing cabinet until the next year. There were a couple of other points I wanted to pick up, if you don't mind, because I'm just aware that I found the going around the houses that we did at the beginning of this session really helpful. And I'm going to kind of look at Anita here. There were a couple of points around issues around the licensing area, around kind of, is there any grit in the system with the level 5 qualification providers, and when FAPs or when financial advice providers are looking to kind of set up on their own. I just wanted to tell me if I get this wrong, but we are going to take both those points away, and we'll dig into those a little bit more. So nice. Although we will take a look into that, because that's something. I mean, unless Anita, you wanted to pick up any of those points. So sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
We continually.
We'll just pass the mic. Hang on. Yep.
This might not be the thing. Might give me one of these. So we
Just don't let her sing.
Hello.
Yeah, it's on. Yeah.
So we've got Ramil at the table here with me as well from Financial Advice, and we continually meet with the providers to see how we can get them performing to the standard that we require and that works for industry, because just because they do a thing a way does not mean it's the right way. And we need to be really mindful of financial advisors in the industry. They're my passion and they're our customers, and we have to do the right thing to make life simpler and not so complex and complicated. We have worked through a couple of people who have done what you've talked about, and it's worked well, but we will undertake to do more work on that and bring it up at our next meeting. So we meet continually with the providers, and we will undertake to do more work for you.
Now, we really can't get through, thank you for that, that was very helpful, and we just can't get through an hour without talking about AI at the moment. So I have a question on that. Lots of hype around AI, and there's a number of services. ChatGPT is named here, and there are many others, Claude, Grok, and so forth. And how concerned are you about personally identifiable client data being entered into those tools to generate documents? And maybe some wider comments around the use of AI in financial advice. Yeah,
thank you, Russell. And I think we as a regulator are very much at the start of our own personal journey on AI. Very recently, our chief economist and his team commissioned some research on AI. It was important that we actually understood who is using AI, how is AI actually used. So look forward to some output there. I know a lot of the foreign regulators, the Dutch regulator and some of the US states independently themselves are starting to think about data and access to data and how that plays out, and certainly AI. I think it'd be fair to say we're still developing our own thoughts on that.
So it's both. So you'll see more from us, and we're kind of looking at AI both as a tool that we use ourselves. So we're doing a little bit of internal piloting. What I'm seeing from a whole range of I mean, the Dutch AFM are kind of really strong in this area. The Singapore Monetary sort of Monetary Authority are amongst a number of regulators that are both looking into how do they internally use AI to support their work, and also what does it mean for regulatory outcomes in terms of what are the risks? It's one of those it's one of those areas where it seems to offer so much promise that could be delivered. And also we can all think about the risks that are involved in it as well. So I can't really, this is a very long-winded way of saying I can't really say very much at the moment, but we're very alive to it. And we're also looking to, when we're looking at our own workforce, and I'm talking about the FMA resources, when we're looking at our own strategic workforce planning, we are very much leaning into looking to bring on to the staff in the FMA more individuals who are very grounded in the technology and can help us navigate our way through.
Nice, thank you so much. I know that I'd just like to mention, maybe in addition to that, there's a set of privacy principles published by the Privacy Commissioner around the use of AI. Very, very well worth having a look. We've done a paper on a series of tests which identifies a range of common hallucinations, which came out. One of those, the particular AI we were doing that test on hallucinated an entire new regulatory authority, which was very interesting. So there are clearly some major limitations there. But of course, there is still quite a lot of scope for using also non-personally identifiable information and getting good technical analysis sometimes of data sets, which is quite cool out of that. But we've also... There's another question, I think this might be our last, where we go, and it talks really about our responsibility, our joint responsibility, not just yours but ours too, to promote the positive influence of the industry. And we've heard so much about how New Zealanders need good financial advice, and you've given us some examples of that too. I guess the framing of this question was and maybe it's more about you, Michael, than Samantha, if you only work with organisations where you're undertaking enforcement, does that kind of colour your view of how it works? And I think I know the answer to that, but do you want to give, share about how you get to see both the good and the bad?
Yeah, thank you, Russell. A quick look around the room. I don't think there's anyone under any sort of enforcement action here, so maybe that goes through and answers that question.
Yeah.
As Samantha has said, we are very much a regulator that values and at the forefront of what our activity is engagement. So there's a lot of conferences that we speak at. There's a lot of meetings. I'm at a board meeting at least once a week through any one of our deposit takers, through our insurers, through our financial advisors. We've got a team of 50 people who engage regularly and see a lot of positivity. So, look, I think we'd like to think through these engagements we've got a really good grounded and balanced view. And gosh, there is so much good and so much that we can be so incredibly proud of for this industry. I came from the industry. I spent 20 years in the insurance industry before I moved into the FMA. I'm probably a wee bit biased. I have an absolute firm view of what and who we actually are, jointly, and what we can deliver to outcomes for consumers. Sam?
Yeah, I mean, what sort of agree with everything you said, Michael. I mean, I think the other point that I'd underline is actually the New Zealand culture. So I've worked in jurisdictions where there's been a huge political pressure to be very disciplinarian and enforcement-led. And New Zealand doesn't really roll like that. So that's a kind of a cultural perspective. Also, I mentioned in my speech, I talked about resourcing the FMA, having a well-resourced regulator means that we do have the resources to be able to bring in a broad range of experience into our staff, and that we've got the resourcing to do what you see, which is us being able to go out and engage. And there's nothing like the kind of the face-to-face engagement to really bring home the absolute value that is added by and the absolute passion that we see on the part of financial advisors. I was in the Hawke's Bay with Michael just over a year ago now, and speaking to a group of financial advisors there who provided support to their clients all during the weather events. And I'd make a couple of points about that. The first was that we had the head count, and and forgive me if I talk about, because the resourcing, or decent resourcing of a regulator is incredibly important. We had the resources, we could take the time to be able to go out and have those conversations, and that was really important to me to be able to do that. The second was that because we were able to do that, we had clear evidence on the ground of just what those local financial advisors had done to keep the lights on for their clients. Including, I remember one woman was trekking in there wasn't a decent path to walk on, was trekking 5 to 6 kilometres both ways each day so that she could be into a central office to be there to support her clients. I mean, you can't bank that, frankly. And what that does when we see that as a regulator, when we've got the opportunity to go out and see that as a regulator, you've got a really positive view of the fundamental value that is provided by this profession, this industry, So we just want to be there to help, to help support it and work together to deliver some, continued great outcomes for New Zealand consumers.
That's fantastic. And we are at time, and I do just want to thank you again. Thank you very much to Samantha and Michael. We really appreciate you being able to share with us. That's brilliant. Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for coming along. And I just want to acknowledge the FSC committee for organising this and for all the hard work that goes into it. Thanks.
Thank you, Russell.